All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to be doing a deep dive into security.
Ooh, exciting.
When we think about security, people often their eyes glaze over a little bit, you know?
It can be a little dry.
Yeah. So we're going to try to make this as exciting and applicable to your life as possible.
Absolutely.
And so to get started, what are some of the first things that come to your mind when you think about security? Like, what are we talking about here, even?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is really, it's about protecting things,
Okay.
right? It's about protecting information, our systems, even ourselves, from harm.
Okay, so it's like the digital equivalent of locking your doors and windows.
Exactly. But it goes beyond that, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about physical security.
Right.
It's about protecting our digital lives, too.
So we're talking about things like passwords and firewalls and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. But also things like being aware of phishing scams, using strong passwords, and even be careful about what information we share online.
So it's a combination of technology and awareness.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and taking steps to protect ourselves, both online and offline.
So how do we even begin to navigate this complex world of security? It seems like there's so much to keep track of.
Well, a good place to start is with the basics. And one of the most fundamental concepts in security is the CIA Triad.
Okay, the CIA Triad. Now, before we get into that, I have to ask, is this about actual spies? Or is it something totally different?
Haha. Not spies this time, although the acronym's the same. But in the world of security, CIA stands for Confidentiality, Integrity, and Availability.
Okay, so three big words. What do they actually mean in practice?
Well, confidentiality is all about keeping information secret. Think of it like keeping a diary locked away so only you have the key.
So like encryption, passwords, those sorts of things.
Exactly. Anything that helps prevent unauthorized access to information. Then we have integrity.
Okay, integrity. I'm guessing that means making sure data hasn't been messed with.
You got it. It's about ensuring that information remains accurate and unaltered. Like if you're baking a cake, you want to make sure no one secretly swapped the sugar for salt.
Chaos in the kitchen. So how do you actually ensure that in the digital world? Like how do you know if someone's tampered with a file or a database?
Well, there are techniques like checksums and digital signatures, which act like tamper-proof seals. If someone messes with the data, the seal breaks, and you know something's wrong.
So it's like a digital fingerprint that proves the data is authentic.
Exactly. And then we have availability, which might be the most obvious.
Okay, availability. That's about making sure things are up and running when you need them, right?
Exactly. Think of it this way. What good is your data if you can't access it when you need it? Like if your email is down right when you're expecting that super important message.
Ugh, that's the worst. So what kinds of things threaten availability?
Well, there are things like natural disasters, power outages, technical glitches, but also cyber attacks, like those DDoS attacks we hear about, where hackers try to overwhelm a website with traffic and crash it.
It's like a digital traffic jam.
Exactly. And just like a traffic jam can prevent you from getting where you need to go, a DDoS attack can prevent users from accessing a website or online service.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these three pieces fit together. Confidentiality keeps things secret, integrity ensures they're accurate, and availability makes sure we can access them when we need to.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is the importance of each element can change depending on the context. Like, for a public website, availability might be the top priority, while for a banking platform, confidentiality and integrity would be paramount.
Okay, so the CIA Triad gives us a framework for thinking about security. But what about the data itself? I mean, it's not just sitting there in a vault all the time, right?
You're right, data is constantly moving and changing. And that brings us to the concept of data states. Data at rest, data in motion, and data in use.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these data states.
Well, data at rest is pretty straightforward. It's like files stored on your computer or in the cloud. Stuff that's just sitting there, not actively being used.
So like documents, photos, music files, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And since it's stored information, encryption is our best friend here. It's like putting those files in a locked safe.
So it's all about keeping those files secure when they're not being used. What about data in motion? I'm guessing that's when data is traveling across the internet.
You got it. Think of it like sending a letter through the mail. You put it in an envelope to protect it during transit. Data in motion needs that same kind of protection, especially when it's traveling over public networks.
So we're talking about things like secure email protocols and encrypted connections.
Exactly. We want to make sure that data can't be intercepted and read while it's on the move.
Okay, so data at rest is protected by encryption. Data in motion is protected by secure connections. What about data in use? That seems like it would be the trickiest to protect.
You're absolutely right. Data in use is like trying to read a book while someone's still writing it.
But that's a good analogy. So how do you protect data that's actively being used? You can't really encrypt it, can you?
Exactly. That's where things like clean desk policies and careful screen placement come into play. It's about being mindful of our surroundings and minimizing the risk of someone peeking at our screens.
So it's about physical security and awareness, even in the digital world.
Precisely. And it's about using things like automatic workstation locking so our computers lock themselves when we step away.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. We have the CIA Triad, those different data states, and it all comes back to protecting our information and systems from harm.
Exactly. And it's not just about technology, it's about people, too.
Right. We're the weakest link, aren't we?
Well, we can be, but we can also be the strongest link. It's all about awareness, education, and making smart choices.
Okay, so let's talk more about those smart choices. What are some of the key things that individuals can do to protect themselves and their information?
Well, one of the simplest yet most effective things is to use strong, unique passwords for every online account.
Ugh, passwords. They're such a pain to remember.
I know, right? But a strong password is like having a good lock on your door. It makes it much harder for someone to break in.
So no more password 123 then?
Definitely not. And whenever possible, enable multi-factor authentication. It's like having two locks on your door.
Okay, so strong passwords, multi-factor authentication. What else?
Be cautious about what information you share online, especially on social media.
Right, because once it's out there, it's out there.
Exactly. And be wary of phishing scams, those emails or messages that try to trick you into giving away personal information.
Those are getting more and more sophisticated these days.
They are. So it's crucial to be aware of the warning signs and to think twice before clicking on any links or attachments from unknown senders.
So it's about being skeptical and cautious, not just blindly trusting everything we see online.
Exactly. And don't forget about physical security, too. Keep your devices secure, be mindful of your surroundings, and be careful about who you allow to access your personal information.
So it's about being vigilant, both online and offline.
Absolutely. Security is a mindset, not just a set of tools.
This has been a great overview of the basics, but I'm curious, we've talked a lot about protecting against the bad guys. Is there a framework for thinking about the threats themselves? Like, what are the different ways our information can be compromised?
There is. Remember the CIA Triad? Well, there's a sort of evil twin to that called DAD, Disclosure, Alteration, and Destruction.
Okay, DAD, what do those stand for?
Disclosure is all about unauthorized access to information. Essentially, it's the opposite of confidentiality.
So like someone hacking into a system and stealing data.
Exactly. Then we have alteration, which involves tampering with data, compromising its integrity.
So like someone changing your bank account balance or messing with the results of an election.
Exactly. And then we have destruction, which is all about making data inaccessible. Think of it as the opposite of availability.
So like deleting data or causing a system crash so no one can access it.
Exactly. So by understanding DAD, we can better anticipate and mitigate the different ways our information can be attacked.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense. We have the CIA Triad, which defines what we're protecting, and D8, which defines the threats themselves.
Exactly. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Okay, well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, but it's clear that there's so much more to explore.
There is. And in the next part, we'll delve deeper into some specific threats and vulnerabilities and explore how to protect ourselves against them.
Sounds good. I'm already looking forward to it.
Me too.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I encourage everyone to think about the state of their own data. Is it at rest, in motion, or in use? And how are you protecting it?
That's a great question to ponder. And we'll be back soon to explore even more fascinating aspects of security. Until then, stay curious and stay secure.
Welcome back to our security deep dive. Last time we laid the groundwork, we talked about the CIA Triad, data states, even how those real-world physical security things apply to digital.
Right.
And a big part of that is, that idea of integrity, making sure no one's messing with our data.
Exactly.
But how does that actually happen? How do attackers actually mess with data integrity?
Well, one way is something called code injection.
Okay, code injection. Sounds kind of scary.
It can be. Think of it like this. Imagine a hacker sneaking malicious code into a website.
So the code itself is the weapon.
Exactly. It's like slipping a poison pill into a recipe.
Yikes. So what does that malicious code actually do?
All sorts of nasty things. It could alter data, redirect users to malicious sites, or even give the attacker control over the system.
That's unsettling.
So how do we protect against code injection?
Well, a lot of it comes down to secure coding practices.
Okay, so the developers who build the software need to be extra careful.
Exactly. They need to write code that's resistant to these attacks. Think of it like a chef who's very carefully inspecting each ingredient before it goes into the dish.
Making sure there's no poison pills in the soup.
Right. And that's where things like input validation and sanitization come in. It's about making sure that only legitimate data is allowed into the system.
So it's like having a bouncer at the door, checking IDs before letting anyone in.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's about building security in from the start. But what about software we already have? I'm always getting those update notifications. Are those really that important?
Oh, they are absolutely crucial.
Really? I usually just ignore those.
Well, you shouldn't. Those updates often contain fixes for known security vulnerabilities.
So it's like patching holes in a fence before someone can sneak through.
Exactly. Remember that Equifax breach we talked about? That was a prime example of what can happen when organizations don't keep their software patched and up to date.
Okay, point taken. I'll start paying more attention to those update notifications.
Good.
Speaking of real-world examples, that Stuxnet worm we mentioned before really stood out to me.
Yeah, Stuxnet was a fascinating case.
And like, it wasn't about stealing data, right? It was all about messing with those industrial systems.
Exactly. It was specifically designed to target those systems that control critical infrastructure.
Right, like power grids and factories.
Exactly. And what Stuxnet did was subtly alter the operation of those systems, causing physical damage.
It's like a digital saboteur sneaking into a factory and tampering with the machinery.
Exactly. It highlights that attacks on integrity can have very real consequences in the physical world.
So it's not just about virtual bits and bytes, it's about protecting those systems that control real-world things.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've seen how integrity attacks can range from subtle data manipulation to, like, outright sabotage.
Right.
But how do we even know if data has been tampered with? It's not always obvious, is it?
You're right. And that's where those checksums and hashes we talked about before come in.
Okay, remind me again how this works.
They're like digital fingerprints for data. Even the tiniest change to the data will result in a drastically different hash value.
So it's like having a digital detective who can tell us if something's been messed with.
Exactly.
But how do we actually use those checksums?
Well, a lot of times when you download software, the website will provide a hash value for the file.
Okay.
And you can use a free tool to generate the hash for the file you downloaded.
Okay.
And if they match, you can be pretty confident that the file hasn't been tampered with.
That's actually really useful. I'm definitely going to start doing that.
Good.
Okay, so we've talked about integrity, how attackers target it, how we can protect against it.
Yeah.
What about availability? What are some of the biggest threats to availability? Like, what are those attackers doing to try to bring systems down?
Well, we've touched on things like natural disasters and power outages. But when it comes to deliberate attacks, those DDoS attacks we mentioned are a major threat.
Oh, okay, there's digital traffic jams.
Exactly. Remember, that's when attackers flood a target with so much traffic that it crashes, preventing legitimate users from accessing it.
Right, right. But how do they generate all that traffic?
They use botnets networks of infected computers under their control, like having an army of zombies at your command.
Wow. Okay, so what can we do about these DDoS attacks? They seem pretty hard to stop.
You're right, they can be. One important strategy is DDoS mitigation services. These are specialized companies that can absorb or deflect those massive attacks.
So they're like digital bodyguards.
Exactly. And then there's the concept of redundancy. Having backup systems and data centers can help ensure that even if one system goes down, another one is ready to take over.
So it's all about having a plan B.
Exactly. And another technique is load balancing, which distributes traffic across multiple servers.
So it's like having multiple lanes on a highway to prevent congestion.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's always the human element.
Right, we can cause our own availability problems.
Exactly. Accidental deletions, misconfigurations, forgetting to renew a domain name, all of these things can lead to downtime.
So it's not just about protecting against external threats, it's also about being mindful of our own actions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered DDoS mitigation services, redundancy, load balancing, and even the human element.
Yeah.
But those are all like technical solutions. What about the bigger picture? Like, how do organizations actually approach security?
Well, it all starts with having a security strategy. Organizations need to identify their critical assets, the data, systems, and applications that are essential to their operations.
Okay, so like taking inventory of all the valuable stuff they need to protect.
Exactly. And then they need to assess the risks.
So figure out what could go wrong and how likely it is to happen.
Exactly. And that helps them prioritize their security efforts and allocate resources effectively.
Makes sense. You wouldn't spend the same amount of money protecting your coffee maker as you would your company's top secret formula.
Right.
So you've got your assets, you've assessed the risks. What's next?
Then it's about putting those safeguards in place. The technical controls, the administrative controls, and even the physical controls.
Okay, so all those things we've been talking about. Firewalls, encryption, strong passwords, policies, and procedures.
Exactly. It's about having that layered approach to security.
Okay, so let's talk more about those administrative controls. You mentioned policies and procedures. Can you give me some examples of those in action?
Sure. One common example is a password policy.
Ah, passwords. The bane of my existence.
I know, right? But a strong password policy is essential.
So what does a good password policy look like?
Well, it should specify things like password complexity. Using a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols.
Okay.
It should also specify a minimum length and how often passwords need to be changed.
So password 123 is officially off the table. Okay, so strong passwords. What else?
Another important policy is access control.
Okay, access control. That's about who has access to what, right?
Exactly. It's based on the principle of least privilege, meaning individuals should only have access to the information and systems they absolutely need to do their jobs.
So it's like a need-to-know basis?
Exactly. And it helps prevent those accidental spills where someone sees something they shouldn't.
Okay, so we've got strong passwords, access control, any other key policies?
Data classification is another important one.
Data classification.
Yeah, it's about categorizing data based on its sensitivity.
Okay.
So highly confidential information would have the highest level of protection, while publicly available information wouldn't need that same level of security.
So it's like having a labeling system for your information.
Exactly. It helps organizations determine how to handle and protect different types of data.
Okay, so we've got policies in place, but policies are just words on paper, right?
Yeah.
How do we make sure people actually follow them?
That's where training and awareness come in.
Right. We're back to that human element again.
Exactly. You can have the best security policies in the world, but if people don't understand them or don't follow them, they're not going to be very effective.
So it's about educating employees about the importance of security and how to follow those policies.
Exactly. And it's about creating a culture of security within the organization where everyone understands their role in protecting information.
This has been really helpful in understanding how organizations approach security, but at the end of the day, it all comes back to the individual, right? We each have a responsibility to protect ourselves and our information.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll focus on in the next part of our deep dive, practical tips and strategies for individuals to stay safe and secure in this digital world.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. All right, welcome back to our final part of this security deep dive. So far, we've covered a ton of ground, from the CIA Triad to those digital bollards and turnstiles.
Right.
And how organizations approach security.
Yeah.
But, I think there's something we haven't fully explored yet.
Okay, what's that?
Like, why? Why do we care so much about protecting information? It can feel kind of abstract sometimes.
You're absolutely right. We often talk about the how of security, the tools, the techniques.
Right.
But the why is equally important.
Yeah, like what are the real-world consequences when security fails?
Well, think about all the information we entrust to digital systems these days.
Okay.
Our financial data, our personal conversations, our medical records, even our location and movements.
It's like our whole lives are online now.
Exactly. And a breach of confidentiality can expose all of that. It can lead to identity theft, financial loss, reputational damage, even blackmail.
So it's not just about inconvenience. It can have serious consequences for individuals.
Exactly. And it's not just individuals who are at risk.
Okay, so what about the bigger picture?
Think about critical infrastructure, power grids, transportation systems, healthcare facilities.
Right.
If those systems are compromised, the consequences could be devastating.
It's kind of scary to think about.
It is. And that's why cybersecurity is so important on a national and global level.
So we've got individual risk, societal risk. Are there any like real world examples that really highlight the potential consequences of security failures?
Absolutely. The NotPetya ransomware attack in 2017 is a prime example.
Okay, not Petya. What happened there?
It crippled businesses worldwide, causing billions of dollars in damage. And it wasn't just about data theft. It was about disrupting operations and causing chaos.
It's like the digital equivalent of a natural disaster.
Exactly. And it showed just how